started with making some introductions. Again, welcome and thank you for making time to join us on this presentation. We are having Dan Wiley, who's head of our incident response, come and join us this afternoon to talk about some of the case studies and stories that he's eager to share with us and learn more about incident response and how we can help your organization. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce you to Dan Wiley, who is going to be presenting to us this afternoon. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very much. Hope everyone's having a wonderful day. I know I am. It's a beautiful spring day here in Washington, D.C. And we're enjoying the weather when we're walking the dog and getting out for the 5 minutes that we get out every few hours, which is good. Hope you're all also getting out and enjoying the weather when you get a chance. It's really important to do your exercise, as it were. So thanks again for the intro. Again, my name is Dan Wiley. I run the incident response team here at Checkpoint. Before I really dive in, though, what I wanted to do is give you a quick warning. Since we're all working from home these days, it's always important to understand that if you hear barking, it's not me. It's this guy. He's a troublemaker. He certainly does not like the Amazon guy, but he does like puffy envelopes. And the main reason he likes the puffy envelopes is that sometimes there are treats in there. He doesn't like people walking with hoodies. He doesn't like backpacks, and he really does not like face masks. And he also doesn't like the kids next door. But he does love squirrels and rabbits, and he likes bringing them home for us for dinner. So we'll give this guy a little berth. If you do hear him barking in the background, I do apologize a little bit, but this is the reality of working from home. So today we're going to talk about a couple key things. I wanted to spend a few minutes today to talk about both the team and some of the attacks that we're seeing. But I think the most important thing to get out there right now is to really understand what we do. So my team is a global team of incident response analysts that are stationed throughout the world. Today we have 20 folks that are supporting all of our customers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we really have been busy. I had a request today from an engineer in Canada to ask how busy are we? And I told him that I really don't have time to even pull the stats. So we've been averaging typically around 2 or 3 cases a day. Now with the pandemic, we're probably around 7 to 8 a day. So we've been pretty darn busy, and the attacks and the methods that are being used are quite interesting. And we're going to talk about some of those today, and we'll go in depth into some of that. Just as a quick information on the team, again, we've really grown in the number of cases from 2018 to 2019. We're basically doubling them. In 2020, especially with this pandemic, I'm pretty certain we'll double the 2,000 to almost 4,000 cases. We're growing very, very rapidly. We're continuing to add more analysts into the team to support our customers' needs. We've had many cases in 2019 that had $10 million and more in losses. Even this weekend, we had a customer that had a $6 million loss to an attack. So the volume and the amounts that are being stolen and taken from customers is actually pretty dramatic, and it's increasing pretty logarithmically. For those folks that went to our CPX meetings in New Orleans this year, you kind of got to hear some of my key points, but I'll just reiterate them real quickly. One thing we found in 2019, which shouldn't really be a big surprise to everyone listening on the podcast or in the webinar here, is that management, especially in the small to medium-sized business, is really not in tune with any security needs whatsoever. Even during this pandemic, and we'll talk about that in a minute, we've seen a lot of folks struggling with what to do around security, and management really is ill prepared to deal with some of these threats. The other big thing that we saw in 2019 is cloud is now a given. There is no more 100% on-prem solutions for customers. It really is a cloud world, and being able to deal with incidents in cloud are absolutely important. And lastly, and we'll go into depth here a little bit, is email. Email is our primary delivery method for all of these attacks that we've dealt with pretty much in 2019, and 2020 really isn't that big of a difference, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But the stats are pretty interesting, and we're seeing the common theme is it's just getting worse out here. It's not getting better, and the attacks are getting much more aggressive and much more effective. So I wanted to talk about 4 attack trends. They shouldn't be anything that you haven't heard of before, but I will take a few minutes to talk about them. So the first thing is remote access. During the COVID-19 pandemic, what we're finding is that remote access is one of the key components to the attack life cycles of some of the campaigns that we're seeing. And they go across all of the major remote access providers, from RDP, Citrix NetScaler, VPNs. We're finding a huge amount around remote access. And those trends were in 2019, but they're continuing into 2020, and a lot of ways they're getting much more aggressive. Now, one thing we've seen that is totally off the charts is phishing. In 2019, phishing was a big deal, and it was really targeted towards individual companies. In 2020, things are a little bit different. We're seeing a little more consumer phishing than we did in 2019. And again, it's around the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing that phishing is a huge deal. We'll talk about some of those phishing attacks here in a minute, but it's really important that you put a lot of effort around email security and making sure that you have all the basics around email security figured out, especially now. All your Office 365 attacks, they haven't gone anywhere. We're still seeing them, and we're still seeing that at a very aggressive pace. Please turn on multi-factor inside of email, and don't just count on the Microsoft security controls when you turn on the security controls inside of O365. Make sure that you add additional security layers, because again, the more layers of protection you have for email, the better, because we're just seeing so many attacks being directed at email. We have actually 2 blog postings, one that was a few weeks ago, specifically around some campaigns that we were tracking around O365 breaches. Highly encourage you to go look at those blog postings. They reference some interesting attack capabilities and attack methods, but one of the things that was the most interesting around the email threats is that we see that the attackers don't just attack one victim. They really are spending a lot of time creating a spider web of connections to be able to allow them to do multiple attacks against multiple victims across a really large demographic. That's huge, right? You need to make sure that when you do have an email breach, that you consider that maybe some of your supply chain might also be compromised too. So in our blog posting, we actually identified 20, 30 other victims inside of this really incestuous O365 breach, where both vendors and suppliers and partners and even service providers were all compromised, and they were being able to attack each other around financial fraud. So look, email, it's really a gift that keeps on giving for attackers. It's just going to be a continual attack vector for the rest of our lives. Embrace the fact that you need to add security controls. Make sure that you don't just rely on the core security controls of Microsoft. Don't assume that they're all working the way that you anticipate. Make sure that you have all of the skills required to actually respond to these attacks. One of the things that we find across all these attacks is that most of our customers don't even have an IR plan. We actually have a poll going. If you go to the polling area, you'll see a question around, do you actually have an IR plan? This is critical, right? If you don't have a plan, how are you going to respond? We can actually work with customers to create plans specific to email compromise, specific to remote access compromise. All of these areas are places that we would spend the effort to work with you to make sure that you knew what to do in these sort of incidents. Now polling's coming in. I see it's kind of cool to watch. You know, it's going up and down. So it looks like the majority of you right now do have plans, and that's great. We will talk about this in a second, but a plan's great, but you got to test that plan too. So we really do encourage you to make sure that you have a plan, but then you also spend the effort to actually do a tabletop exercise around these attacks. So there'll be another poll here in a minute to ask about, have you ever actually gone through and tested your plans? This pandemic is actually an amazing opportunity to say exactly that. Most companies were not prepared for the remote access reality that they were seeing right this moment, right? They didn't know that their capacity on their gateways or their infrastructure wasn't prepared for remote access. So they really needed to test it before a pandemic to make sure that they even had capacity. In Q1, we literally had hundreds of customers contact us and say, I don't have enough capacity for remote access. Please help me find more equipment, bigger boxes, new ways of doing remote access to be able to support this onslaught of users that they're actually seeing. But it's not just remote access, it's also email. You know, same customers who may have still had a legacy Exchange environment weren't ready for the capacity constraints that they're going to find, because now all of a sudden the traffic flows flipped. So instead of everyone, you know, going outbound from the environment, everyone was coming inbound. Plus their internal, all of their web services were also coming into their environment. So their traffic flows literally flipped. So these are areas where a lot of customers, unless you have that tabletop exercise and you go through these exercises to actually test, you actually find yourself in a really strenuous or tenuous position. And a lot of our customers were exactly that, especially 3 or 4 weeks ago. Now, some of the other trends we're finding is cloud. Look, I don't have to tell you that right now, even us, we're running Zoom. The amount of security focus on cloud right this second is totally off the charts. I have never seen anything like that. And that's for both SAP applications, for infrastructure as a service. It's you know, creating API integrations. It's making sure that you have an understanding of how all of your traffic flows inside of the cloud. And what we're finding is that DevOps cycles are actually now increasing really significantly to be able to get new functions and features out there, especially to support this telework reality that we're in. So as you're moving into the cloud, and in a lot of times the last 3 weeks you have now moved to the cloud, you may not have really appreciated the security controls that might be associated with the cloud. And Zoom is a perfect example of folks realizing that maybe the security controls that they thought were inside of a platform may or may not have been there. I will say this, I think, you know, the Zoom security controls, I think all of us should embrace that there may be some things we should do additionally to secure these instances and these web conferences, but I also think it's a little bit blown out of proportion. I have to say that, you know, yes, you know, people are Zoom bombing folks and it's bad, and I appreciate all that. But with basic security controls like multi-factor authentication or single sign-on, or even just having the ability to have, you know, security controls around a password on the sessions and things like that, you know, the basic security controls just weren't followed. And I think a lot of folks now overreact, and now it becomes a thing, right? So look, as you're moving into the cloud, take the time, understand how this all interrelates with you. You're going to have to make security decisions really quickly. If you need help to make some of those decisions, please feel free to interface with our team, and we're happy to help with that. Couple other things that we're finding is that a lot of our customers are trusting integrations, and these are, again, around application trust. So for example, we're finding folks using platforms like Salesforce more than they ever have, And inside of Salesforce, you can connect many, many other apps into Salesforce to make this ecosystem of data and data enrichment and display and statistics, all these cool things. But a lot of folks are missing that when they add these add-ons into platforms, that the trust changes, and you really don't understand sometimes how much data might be flowing to a third party. So one comment, as you're moving into these applications, take the time to understand how those applications have security controls. Make sure that you understand how they might relate and understand where and how the data is flowing from one to another. Okay, so those are sort of the generic sort of attack trends that we've seen. I do want to talk about our response to COVID-19. I know that you're all sort of interested in what we've been doing and what we've been seeing. And you know what? They're basically the same attacks that we saw throughout 2019 and early 2020, except they're totally off the charts. So over the last 2 weeks, we saw an amazing trend. We actually kind of anticipated that this was going to happen. We knew that as folks were going into this telework reality, that they were going to take shortcuts. Because sometimes if you don't have VPNs and you don't have VPN software and training people to get onto VPNs, that's a pain in the rear. And what we found was that a lot of customers, especially small to medium-sized businesses, just decided that, okay, I've got this amazing feature inside of Exchange. Let me just turn on Outlook Web Access to allow remote access to my Exchange server. So at least we could do email. So all they did was open up port 443 to their Exchange server, and magically they now have Outlook Web Access. Now the problem with that is most of those customers were running vulnerable versions of Exchange. So within the first week of folks moving into a remote access sort of paradigm, we saw a significant uptick in OWA compromises or Exchange compromises inside of local systems. We also found the trend that a lot of folks were trying to do migrations in the middle of a pandemic. I do not recommend that, by the way. It's really not the greatest time to try to do an Exchange migration. But we had a lot of folks do that. And then we saw an uptick on vulnerabilities and attacks inside of O365. So as they moved, we saw those vulnerabilities. As they turned on the services, we also saw those vulnerabilities and the attacks. We also saw an uptick in Microsoft file shares being exposed directly to the internet. I cannot tell you how bad of a practice that is. It is like the worst. No one ever anywhere recommends exposing a file share directly on the internet. We did track the same statistic that it increased by about 100% before the pandemic hit. So people were just exposing file shares directly to the internet, and conversely, we actually saw a bunch of attacks. Go figure. So we see this happen time and time again where customers think they're taking shortcuts or are providing access to be able to drive adoption to the remote access world, but then they make some serious mistakes along the way. Now, email-based attacks have also increased. The one that worries me the most is that most of you are supporting a corporate environment. And within the corporate environment, you basically have the basic security controls to be able to stop very basic attacks. But in the consumer world, that's not the case. And we're finding so many folks being targeted with fraud, individual consumer fraud, that it is off the charts. It really is off the charts. We're trying to put some statistics together around this. You'll see some more information from our threat intelligence team and our IR team. But just the IRS frauds that are going to start happening with the government payments are going to be happening in the next few weeks. Even with not having the formal process defined yet, we've already seen alerts from the FBI, the IRS. We've been talking about it for about 2 weeks now. The moment that Congress started talking about this, we were warning all of our corporate customers that this was going to happen, and it's already starting. So just be aware that not just from a corporate side, but even from at home, teaching all of your family and your friends, look out for these things. The US government will not be asking you to fill out a website with your social security number, your address, your phone number. That will not occur. You have to go to the US government to ask for these things. They won't call you. Again, my phone, can't tell you how many phishing scams and emails, SMS scams that we've seen over the last few weeks. Again, it's just off the charts. So one ask for everyone here, go to your family and friends, educate them on these risks, make sure they understand what the normal should be, and try to quell the amount of fraud that we're seeing already today. It's very difficult. We have an amazing product, our Zone Alarm product. If you're interested in that, please feel free to reach out to us, and we'll get you versions of that for your families and friends. We're happy to help any way we can, but it's critical that advanced security controls are actually placed on home systems. We're also finding a lot of folks that are sharing machines. So we see that, the kids are having to do homework on the same machine as, your corporate work is happening. A lot of corporations are starting to relax some of their security controls because folks need to take care of their kids. If there's any way you can keep them separated, try, but we fully understand that in these times you may have to share devices. In that case, make sure that you've got good endpoint security controls and mobile security controls, absolutely critical, and try to keep separate accounts on these systems, right? Try not to use your corporate account for the kids doing homework and things like that. So there's a lot of recommendations. If you want some more pointers, we can actually help with that too. Now, we've also seen with that an increase in email attacks against corporations. A lot of targeted events, especially folks that are in the critical supply chain for this pandemic. We've seen a handful of our customers being targeted with extremely advanced nation-state attacks because there is this moment of perceived weakness and chaos that is a really great time to take advantage of. So a handful of customers in Australia and a handful in the United States, we've seen very, very targeted nation-state attacks. Now, I'm not saying that every one of you will see this. I'm just making you aware that you should be on the lookout for unknown malware types. And if you have any questions around that, please feel free to reach out to us. It is a concern, especially for anyone that has critical infrastructure. We do see that increase. Email threats are everywhere, so it's no different than last year. Just keep on turning on those controls. It's much more important to turn on file emulation, link emulation, all of the advanced security controls to be able to protect for emails. At this moment, it's probably best to turn on everything that you can and throw the kitchen sink at email security threats because, again, it's our #1 attack vector. Now, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about a couple things that have occurred. Some of these are in the press, some of these aren't. But there are a lot of jerks out there. There are a lot of folks that are being targeted very aggressively right this moment. We've seen at least 5 or 6 major attacks against governmental organizations around the world, primarily the health departments of individual governments, social security type of agencies, and revenue agencies, right? So we've seen folks being targeted very aggressively. Anyone that's doing social services right now, central government or state government social services, they are being targeted quite aggressively. So we've seen some here that have made the news around HHS. We've seen those. I encourage you guys to take a look at it. Those are the ones that worry us because if the message and the delivery of the message is impacted in the negative, it truly can have a detrimental effect on everyone's actions. People listen to the government for guidance, and if you say the wrong thing and you do the wrong thing, or if you spoof, an agency's domain name, for example, it can have a really dramatic effect on what's happening on the street right this second. We haven't seen a huge uptick on attacks against hospitals, But what I will say is we've seen the same attacks we saw last year, and the number one is ransomware. We've now responded to 2 or 3 cases where ransomware was introduced inside of health departments or folks that are in the supply chain, and they've had a significant impact on the ability to us respond. These attacks truly have a life-impacting component to them. They will decrease the ability for us to actually respond and support people. This is not okay. So we've been really aggressively working with hospitals, anybody that's in the supply chain, anybody that is providing assistance or any support. We've been spending a heck of a lot of time working with these folks to give them both capabilities and technologies and our consulting services and our services to help defend against these things. The last thing, we have seen some DDoS attacks against folks that were making face masks. I don't understand the logic. I really don't, but they've been at least 2 or 3, manufacturers of face masks that have been DDoSed around the country and in the world. It's quite interesting to see why, and we're still trying to come to the root cause of it. But we do see folks DDoSing these folks. We've also seen DDoS attacks against power companies over the last few weeks. Again, not quite sure what the rationale is, but we are seeing an uptick in those DDoS attacks in the U.S. in particular. The last thing I'll talk about, and I've kind of already touched around this, is Zoom. Again, I can't tell you how many phone calls I've had around Zoom security. The first thing I have to say is turn on security and then call me if you still have any risks that you need to deal with. I'm personally of the belief that Zoom is not terrible. It's not the devil. They're not evil. They really are trying to do the right thing. I think a lot of this is still on us to make sure that we've got, the right security controls, the right approach, the right capabilities, and you actually, deploy it correctly. You can't just turn it on and expect it just to be perfect. You need to spend a little time making sure that you've actually secured it. And that goes for any one of the web conferencing systems, Teams, WebEx, they all have security components to it. Make sure you spend some time to understand how they work. Put in an operational flow so people don't get blindsided by how the security system should work. Turn on multi-factor. Do those basic things across all those platforms, and you have a much better situation on your hands. So just keep that aware. So ultimately, we've been spending a lot of time working on supporting these customers. We activated our contingency plan on the IR team. What that means is that we had anticipated that we would need additional resources during nationwide or worldwide events just like this event. And we did this about 3 years ago, and we started planning. And those plans also included the ability for us to surge our staff and to assist our customers. So now we've doubled our team's ability to support our customers. So we're also looking at increasing that again over the next few months to help our customers. We are now providing support for 3 companies with staffing around the world. So that means we're actually taking over and helping run security operations centers for 3 of our customers. It's probably now going to be around 6 of our customers in the next few weeks. And the main reason is that our customers are needing support as some of their employees are either sick or being cycled out because they're burnt out and they need just more support. So we can help customers in that predicament. So if you do need help in those, with staffing, or if you need assistance, we're here to assist. We've been spending a huge amount of time with all of the central government law enforcement agencies and state law enforcement agencies to provide updates on things that we're seeing. And we're also spending a lot of time with hospitals and government and critical infrastructure just to support. So things like getting hardware. The first 3 weeks, we shipped 4x or 5x of our inventory stock out to the field just to support customer needs around VPNs and more horsepower for all of their bandwidth needs. So it's crazy. It's really changing the environment. One last thing is we've been working with R&D to fast track a handful of products and solutions to customers to be able to provide additional capabilities. So some of our Infinity solutions, especially the cloud ones, are coming to market very quickly, and we're providing a lot of those for free to any of the healthcare organizations that might need it. And then if anybody needs any of these capabilities going forward, we're obviously working with our customers to onboard them as quickly as we can. So there's a lot to this. The team has been working pretty much straight for the last 5 weeks. I don't see it slowing down anytime soon. I think, if we follow sort of the progression of the infection rates, we kind of follow the amount of work and incidents that we're seeing on the teams. So we're seeing a lot of activity on the East and West Coast right now, and we're now starting to see a lot more activity in the central United States. So we're definitely going to have waves of activity and waves of response, and I don't think that's going to end anytime soon. So those are the sort of threats that we're seeing and how we're responding to some of these activities. I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about some of our services. I'm sure you have some questions around these. Our core service is our proactive and reactive IR. Our proactive is basically working with a customer to ensure that all of our capabilities are mirrored inside of a customer's environment. So making sure that they have the ability to actually respond, they have a security plan, they have done a tabletop exercise, all of those proactive things to get ready for an incident. And then our reactive side of our service, where we're available within 15 minutes. You pick up the phone, within 15 minutes you're talking to an analyst working on an incident in real time. We are off the hook when it comes to the number of inbound calls. We're averaging probably 10 or so calls an hour into the team. Some days are worse than others, but we're seeing a huge uptick in the number of inbound queries to the team. Please feel free to send us any questions you have. We're always available to assist. These are paid engagements, and if you're interested in learning more about the core IR services, please feel free to reach out to us. We're also doing a lot more compromise assessments for customers. Compromise assessments are basically proactive engagements where we're going in to see what's going on in your environment, to see if we can find malware or compromise, and then we provide a full assessment on what we find within your environment. We've actually seen an uptick on this. The main uptick was actually, can we do a compromise assessment on remote users? And the answer is yes, we can. And we've actually been working with customers to provide a full understanding of some of the threats that they're seeing in real time. We're also seeing a lot more threat hunting engagements. So we're actually working with customers proactively to go hunt inside of an environment 24/7. We've now been doing this for about a year, where we're helping customers actually defend their network in real time. We're doing a lot more consulting services. One of the main areas that we're seeing an uptick in our consulting services is working with security operations services, specifically to get more scale out of SOCs, getting more process integration that includes IR workflows, playbooks, a lot more effective and scalable. And lastly, we're doing a lot of things around threat intelligence and bringing additional threat intelligence to customers, making it automated within the Checkpoint framework, and really working on our Checkpoint Infinity SOC program to give you more and more capabilities within your environment to make more effective use of the Checkpoint ecosystem and to integrate with all of your SOC tools, things like Splunk and Alien Vault and QRadar and things like that. So spending a lot of time on all of those things. So Kathleen, are you still around?
Yes, so Dan, we have a couple of questions that have been coming through, so I think this would be a perfect time to try to take those on. But before we move on to the questions, I want to take a moment to recognize some of our sponsors for making this possible. So thank you, Access IT, Alanic Data, RMSource and Teneo for sponsoring this event. And a reminder to all of our attendees that the first 50 customer attendees will be receiving an email from me with their Amazon card that will be emailed to you post the event, either later tonight or tomorrow morning. So please look out for that email with your e-card. It will be coming from me, from Catherine Castro. My contact information was on the invitation, so if you have any further questions, you can direct them directly to me. Also, at the end of the webinar, we're going to be sending you a SurveyMonkey through the chat that you can look at. Please take a minute or two to fill out this quick survey and provide us your feedback on the topic that we presented today, as well as indicate if you would like to continue the conversations with our Checkpoint representatives. So you'll have that option to fill out the SurveyMonkey, which again I will launch in a minute. But there is some questions in the chat and the Q&A, Dan, that have come through. I think you addressed a couple already, so we can go straight to those.
Okay, great. So we had a couple questions about Zoom. I think I kind of answered those. I mean, look, I'm not saying Zoom is perfect, but I don't think anything's perfect. I don't think Teams is 100% security. I don't think WebEx does. I don't think any or all of those conferencing solutions, there's trade-offs to everything. And I think the biggest issue I have with any and all of these is that no one really spent any time to actually evaluate any of those security controls. So I think it's a big deal. And I think we should all look at, all the security controls and make decisions on which ones should be enabled and which ones shouldn't. Because it's a great opportunity to reset some of our assumptions on if these, tools are actually giving us the security that you require. Okay, you mentioned your calls are increasing 100% year over year. Are these breaches? Are these panic calls? Or are these preventative? The vast majority are breaches with a close second of panic. And panic is an interesting sort of metric, but let's just say it's more of a question, right? Maybe they ask a threat question around a malware, or if there's a protection that they need to enable, or what's the best practice on how to deal with a security control. I would say 20% of our calls are in that. I would say 80% are related to actual attacks, breaches that have actually caused damage. Preventative, we are seeing an increase. Our business is sort of a 70-30 split. 70% of our business is related around core IR and things like compromise assessments and threat hunting. And then about 30% are the consulting services and SOC services that we're doing. I have another one. I heard a stat that mobile phone connections to computers are increasing 25%. Are you seeing that as well? Is that leading to more breaches? I don't know if that's true or not. I mean, look, I use my my iPhone at times to give me, a 4G access, and I make it a hotspot. If that's the case, yeah, I'm sure that's really, really increasing. I don't think that's leading to more breaches. I mean, as long as it's an IP connection, you're still pretty much vulnerable to most of these attacks. So I would say that the number of fraud events are definitely increasing on home users. I'm not saying that there's a huge uptick in corporate attacks via remote users yet. I think that might be coming. It just takes more time to make those attacks more effective. What we do see is directed attacks against the VPN services, right? So RDP services directly, or the VPN device that you connect to. We see a lot of attacks against that kind of infrastructure. Any other considerations other than the following in case of security breach happening? Use a VPN, using MFA, DLP, antivirus, malware, spam protections, IP set to prevent. Threat extraction and threat emulation is very, very high on my list. Extremely high on my list. The main reason is that you want to have file security. It's absolutely vital. You need it for things like Teams. You need it for Slack. You need it for all of these collaboration tools, because you're going to start exchanging files with each other, and those files might be compromised. So make sure that you've got file protections, that you've got anti-ransomware protections. Make sure that you've got full forensics capability on your endpoints. A full EDR is critically important for the more corporate users. Check Point offers an amazing sandblast agent technology. Highly recommend you take a look at it to give you the whole breadth of security controls that you might need. Very, very important. And I would also say cloud too, right? So it's not just the traditional network security controls, but you need to apply all of this logic also into cloud too. Okay, another question, another Zoom question. I think I've answered all of those. Have you seen any impacts to healthcare entities and their ability to perform medical services due to compromise? Yes. Could you please share your contact information? Yes. It's dwiley@checkpoint.com, and I'll go to my slides here, and you can. Oh, I was going to share a really cool social distancing thing that we saw from one of our customers. One of our customers has a very, very large ranch, and they were struggling with how to actually explain to their folks what 2 meters looked like. So they decided that they were going to use cows and calves as their metric for social distancing. I thought that was pretty funny. Maybe apply your own logic. Maybe one fishing pole between you two, or some other metric. But I found this funny. But here's my contact information. You can always call the team at the 1-866 number. You can also contact me at dwiley@checkpoint.com. And you can also contact our emergency-response hotline. Again, we're always available to assist. And if you have any concerns, if you have an attack that's ongoing right this moment, please feel free to reach out to us. We will work with insurance companies and your legal teams. We'll continuously assist and manage the incident with you. So we can definitely do that. We do have another question. So have you seen any impacts to healthcare entities' ability to perform medical service? Yeah, so yes. Sorry, Patricia, just saw that again. Yes, we have. And sadly, it does have an impact, hopefully temporary, because we're able to stop most of these attacks. But there have been instances where it did have an impact, which is quite sad. One last comment. There's a shortage of blood right now. So if you do have an opportunity to donate blood, it would be greatly appreciated. I know it's quite difficult under these circumstances, but if you can, I would highly recommend that you do. Also, please, if you have any questions around the cyber component to any of these attacks, feel free to reach out to us. We're always available. I think that's it. Any
Great.
other questions? We'll give it another 10 seconds.
I see one more, I think, that just came through, Dan. Let me see.
Yep.
Oh, just a thank you for sharing the information. So once again, Dan, thank you so much for taking this time out of your busy schedule to come and talk to us. A reminder to everyone that on the chat, you will find the survey link, SurveyMonkey link. Please take a minute or two to respond. And again, I will be contacting the lucky first 50 end user customers who logged into the WebEx, into the Zoom, so that we can get you the $30 Amazon e-gift card. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and please be safe. Please take good care of yourselves and your loved ones. Have a great rest of your day.